Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so today we're going to talk about he goes to destruction. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the eighth king and how he goes to destruction. And so if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that I said that Trump was the sixth king and that Biden was the seventh king, and then now Trump's the eighth king. And so we read about that in Revelation 17. It says, "The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The seven heads are seven mountains on which the woman sits. That's the verse number. And they are seven kings. Five have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. The beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth, and is of the seven, and he goes to destruction." So I get that phrase from Revelation. And so we saw with Trump, so I believe that Trump is the beast from the earth, okay? And it says, and it's interesting that in Revelation it says the beast that you saw, so that also connects the beast to the two witnesses, the eyes, okay? The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come out of the abyss and go to destruction. Okay, so Trump was president, and then he wasn't president, and then it's like he came back from the abyss to be president again, okay? And they talk about how it was kind of miraculous that he won the election. And then it says, "And those who dwell on the earth whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come." And so those would be the people, that aren't Jesus's followers, that put too much faith in the fact that Trump returned, to office, and see it as a miracle and see it, as something to pay attention to, and not realizing that God is actually the one that raises kings and lower kings. Okay, so God brought Trump back for this season. And I believe a lot of it has to do with the judgment that God's wanting to bring on America. And so it goes on to say the seven heads are seven mountains on which the woman sits. So that would be the women of Babylon. And so seven mountains could be both the seven churches, but also G7. So it's interesting that when Trump returned, so Trump's like a big Putin fan from Russia. And so they talked about how Trump wants to make Putin part of G7, so that would actually make it G8. And so it's interesting because Biden, who I said was the seventh king, he had G7 as G7. I mean, he didn't want Russia to be a part of it. And so it's interesting that Trump, who I think is the eighth king, wants Russia to join, and make it, that would make it G8. So that's really kind of interesting. And then it says, "And they are seven kings." So the seven mountains are also the seven kings, the seven presidents. Five have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. That's Biden. And then it says, "The beast which was and is not," so Trump was president, then he wasn't. He himself is also the eighth and is of the seven. So he's part of the first original seven because he's number 6. And he goes to destruction. And so if you're really wondering what's going on in the world right now, it's because Trump is the eighth king and he's bringing destruction. And when I was making my videos before, I always thought the destruction that Trump was going to bring would be the Civil War, and I still believe that's going to happen. That's going to be kind of the culmination of all the destruction that Trump brings is that he's going to prompt the civil war in America. But we're seeing him systematically destruct the American government. And it's interesting because a lot of people, especially like, it actually surprises me when there's conservative Christians that think what Trump is doing is great and he's making America great again. And so I think there's a lot of people that are under this deluding influence. I called it the deluding influence of Trump, where they think that Trump's a good guy, and they're not really seeing his weaknesses. So, anyways, and then we also read about the destruction in Daniel 9. It says, after the 62 weeks, the anointed will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And its end will come with the flood, even to the end there be war, desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offerings. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So these are very packed verses about these last days. Okay. And so I had I had 3 different 62 weeks. One of them was after 62 weeks of, I think, after Biden was in Israel. Let me look. Okay, so this happened on Sukkot. It was actually 62 weeks after the Saudi deal, that was mentioned in the newspapers on August 9th, 2023. 62 weeks after that was the day before Sukkot. And then on Sukkot, the IDF said it was very, very likely that Sinwar had been killed, and so he was the leader of Hamas. Okay, so there's one guy that was killed on a 62-week time frame. The second one that I had, let's see, am I going to remember that? Let's see. So then there's the 62 weeks after the war started in Israel on October 7th. Let's see, will I be able to find that? I should have made a list of this. But I kind of, since I couldn't find like a 7-week time frame that connected to these first 262, I kind of blew them off. But now for some reason I decided to mention them again. But I don't have my list of where they are. Wait, I know where it's written here. I'll look it up. So you might want to skip forward a minute or two while I'm looking it up. So the other 62 week is on December 17th. It was the 62nd week and the 4th day of the war. That was the Electoral College vote, when they, voted for Trump. I mean, you know how there's a bunch of Electoral College votes and, things that happen. So you could say that, that was one of the days that Biden was cut off, with Trump coming back to power. And then I have this other one, which I listed at the bottom of the page, which was 62 weeks after Biden was in Israel, was December 24th, 2024. And then 7 weeks later is Tu B'Shabbat, which is the New Year for trees on the Jewish calendar. And the middle week of those 7 weeks had the ceasefire and the inauguration. Okay, so that could be one of the covenant with the 1 week, if you make the 1 week 7 weeks. And in the middle, there's a stop put to sacrifice and grain offering. Okay, so obviously the ceasefire is a type of stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And then and the inauguration too, with Trump coming to power, that was putting a stop to Biden, who was sacrificing America and American dollars for his global agenda, and also the sacrifice, you could say maybe like the grain offering of Israel, where Biden was definitely had his hands on Israel and dictating how they can fight this war, and dictating that they needed to take care of the Palestinians. So he was definitely putting the Israelis on the back burner too for his global agenda. But anyways, so then it says on the wing of abominations. So the ceasefire that actually happened, the third one of Biden, was actually quite, and so I don't think that's the one. Let me think. The middle week with the ceasefire, and I'm trying to decide. Okay, so yeah, that would be the one that was January 15th. Okay, was when it was announced, and then and then they actually started it on January 19th was when they started it. That ceasefire is actually a pretty wicked ceasefire, very devastating to Israel. Because, and we've seen it played out, and so it was the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and so we've seen how Hamas is trickling out some of the hostages, while Israel has to let, just hundreds and hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Now the Israeli hostages would be innocent. Okay, they were innocently kidnapped from their homes on October 7th. But the Palestinian prisoners were arrested for terrorist type activities. And Israel's having to release those Palestinian terrorists back into the general population, which is very dangerous for Israel. Because they've seen that when terrorists get released, they just go back into terrorism. Okay, so that ceasefire was a real wicked ceasefire, and it was interesting that it was involved both Trump and Biden. Their administrations were both involved in that, and it was interesting that it happened on January 15th, because 15 is 7 plus 8, so it's the 7th king and the 8th king is reflected in the date, and the Hebrew date is the same too, Tevet 15. So then it's interesting that Daniel says, on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. And so that would kind of imply that part of the reason Trump is returning to power is that his destruction and desolation is partly judgment for this ceasefire on the 15th. So judgment for Biden, judgment for the left, but also judgment for the right too. Just general judgment for America. But then Daniel goes on to say that at some point there's going to be a complete destruction poured out on the one who makes desolate. So at some point, Trump's going to go away. He's going to be judged. Okay, and I actually believe that Jesus is the one that does that. In my previous videos, I talked about how 2020 was the year of the two witnesses, and I had Trump and Netanyahu being the two witnesses. And remember that they did 6 quote-unquote peace deals. And then 2021 was the year of the beast from the sea. That's when we saw Biden show up. And so that 21 connects to the 7th king number. And And so now we're actually seeing that. So I have like set a list of 7 things that Biden actually did against Israel while he was president. Um, so it's interesting that, he was the 7th king. And then in 2024, I call it the year of the 8th king because we really saw Trump returning. Okay. That was when they had the RNC, and also the biggest thing that happened was, he almost got assassinated, and so people saw that as a false messianic sign of Trump. Talked about that in my previous videos. And so a lot of stuff happened in 2024 where we really saw Trump returning, and really kind of exercising power even before he became president. And then, so I'm wondering if this year, 2025, is when we're going to see Jesus, the Christmas King. And I really think we are. So, and I also just mentioned too with Obama, he was president from 2009 to 2017. And if you add 17 and 9, it adds up to 26. And if you divide 26 by 2, because remember, Obama had 2 terms, you get that number 13, which I definitely think that number connects to Obama. And then the other thing that was interesting about 2024, with 2024 being the year of the 8th king, we saw the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah was 6 days in 2024, and then 2 days kind of spilled over into 2025. And so I'm wondering if that is a foreshadowing of maybe we're only going to see Trump for 2 months in 2025. We'll just have to see what happens. But Hanukkah is really interesting how it's 8 days long. And so I think there's a connection to the 8th king. So, I mean, really what I think, because there's actually 9 candles total in the Hanukkah, the Hanukkah menorah. Because what I think it represents is that how the light of Jesus lasted through the 8 days, through the 8 kings. Okay. That there is still a group, a remnant of people that follow Jesus that didn't bow to the lies on the left or the lies on the right. Okay. And they kept their faith in Jesus during the 8 days. So this is the picture from Daniel. So in Daniel 2, they talk about a statue. And so I have talked about this all throughout my videos. And I'm still trying to see if I got like kind of the end of this statue put together. Because I had Trump and the BLM rioters being the legs of iron of this statue. And then I had the feet, which I'm not totally sure about the feet, but I had the feet being MAGA and Joe Biden. Or, like the left and the right, really. I mean, which is true about Trump and BLM. I mean, the reason why, Trump and BLM being the legs of iron, that would be like the militant people on the left and the right. Okay, so Trump and his followers would be the militant on the right, and the BLM rioters were the militant on the left. And we really saw that in the first term of Trump. But then during Joe Biden's term, there was still that division, and we saw, the MAGA people, were still there, albeit, except maybe a little suppressed. But we also saw that how during Joe Biden's term, the MAGA people really rose up to vote, bring Trump back. And so that'd be the 2 feet. And so now I'm wondering if we're in the season of the 10 toes. And so Daniel 2 talks about the 10 toes being the iron and the clay. And so what I thought was interesting, and so the iron and the clay, they don't mix. Okay. And so the iron could connect to Trump's followers, and the clay could connect to Jesus's followers. And it's interesting because I think there's a connection with the 10 toes to the 10 virgins. And so in Matthew 25, which to me it's interesting that it's Matthew 25 because we're in the year 2025, we read about the 10 virgins, and they start out being 10, but they split into 5 and 5, and 5 have oil and 5 don't have oil. And so what I believe is the Trump followers don't have oil. They have a Messiah figure that is not led by the Holy Spirit, whereas Jesus followers are waiting for Jesus to return, who is led by the Holy Spirit. And so so I got the 8 kings charted out, and anyways, yeah. So and Biden being the beast from the sea, he was here for just a little while. And it says the beast from the sea gets 3.5 years or 42 months. And I really think the counting of the 42 months started from, I think it was June 2nd, 2021 was the 70th week after the deal of the century. And that was, so Trump had lost power before that, but we saw Netanyahu lose his power on the 70th week. So they were both, Trump and Netanyahu were both gone the 70th week, and that was June 2nd, 2021. Okay, and so then that would give Biden really more power to do what he wanted to do. And the left kind of rose up in Israel at that time too. So they really had more free reign to do what they wanted to do. And so that's why, even though Biden was around for 4 years total, I think that the counting started after Netanyahu lost power. Although we did see, and so it's interesting because we saw Netanyahu actually came back during Biden's term, and he came back before Trump came back. So kind of interesting how that works. And so to me, okay, so I mean, I was just kind of making a guess when I came up with this chart. And I think it had a lot to do with, I don't really know what got me started on this, but the fact that Ronald Reagan was the 40th president probably stood out to me. And, you know, it was really confirmed when we saw, like, Donald Trump did a lot of important things on the 6th day of the month. Okay, like, I mean, the very first thing when he made his announcement about moving the embassy to Jerusalem, it was 12/6. And so a lot of the 6 numbers really connected to Trump. I saw a lot of the 7 numbers connect to Biden. Same thing. Biden did key things on 7 dates. Like his inauguration was January 7th, or not inauguration, but his so remember on January 6th they had the riots in the Capitol, and so they weren't able to do the electoral college ceremony, the vote or whatever that they do on January 6th. So for Biden, it got pushed to January 7th. And so that was fascinating to me that happened. So that was one of the first things where we saw that he was the 7th king. Was, you know, January 7th was really when he was officially voted in. And then, so I believe that this chart was confirmed by Trump's inauguration this year, because so with Trump's inauguration, it was so cold that they had to bring it into the Capitol Rotunda, and that had not happened in 40 years since Reagan's second inauguration. Okay, so Ronald Reagan, his 1985 presidential inauguration was actually on January 21st, whereas Trump's was on January 20th. But it was, you know, starting his second term. And so we see just a repeat in history with Trump's second term, that the inauguration, it was so cold for both these inaugurations that they had to be brought inside. So I definitely think God was sending us a sign. And what was really interesting too is that Reagan's inauguration was the 50th inauguration in the United States, whereas Trump's inauguration was the 60th. Okay, see that number 6? So that was fascinating. So, anyways, and then so it's interesting that Trump was the 45th president, and then now he's the 47th president, because those add up to 9/11. Okay, and we saw that the first day of the RNC in 2024 was actually 11 months, 9 days on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, so we've been seeing some 9/11 signs with Trump. And then what's interesting about 47 too is that adds up to 11, and 11 is the number of judgment. Okay, so and it's interesting that right now in February we're on the 11th month on the Jewish calendar. Okay, so that's why we're seeing a lot of judgment. Okay, a lot of like birth pangs, a lot of plagues is what I call them. A lot of weather events, a lot of plane crashes, just all happening in this 11th month. So, because that first plane crash, let me see if this is true. Oh, no, actually, the first plane crash, the first big one that happened in Washington, D.C., that was on the eve of the 11th month. Okay. It was on 29 Tevet, which was the 10th month, the 29th day. But you still got that number 11. 29 adds up to 11. So anyways, and so I talked about these verses in my last video. When you see the abomination of desolation, which is spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place. So what I'm thinking is that there's two. I think there's a bunch of abominations of desolation, but I think in our day and age there's been two major ones. And the first one is the start of the war in Israel, okay? Because in Matthew 24:20, it says, pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, because, and so I kind of circled it here, Sabbath, and then October 7, 2023, because that definitely happened on a Sabbath. Okay, and then because then it goes on to say, for then there will be a great tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. So this war in Israel has been a great tribulation. Okay, definitely for the Jewish people, but definitely affecting Jesus followers that have love for Israel too. So, and the whole eyes of the world have been focused on this war. So anyways, but in Mark, it doesn't mention the Sabbath. It just happens the winter. It says, pray that it may not happen in the winter. And I thought it was interesting that that's verse 18, because that 18 number to me connects to 666. Okay, I connect the 666 numbers to Trump, okay, and the beast from the earth. And so that was interesting. And then so backing up a little bit, Mark 13:14, it says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. So I think some of the people in Judea would connect to like Jesus followers. Okay, so we want to flee to the mountains where our help comes from. But this abomination of desolation, I connected to someone acting like a messianic figure. So this is the second AOD that I think we're seeing in our day. Like the first one was the war in Israel, and the second one is someone acting like a messianic figure. We've already seen it with Biden. Okay, he did it a bunch of times, and I think there was actually one time. Well, I think the Saudi deal happened on a 1290. Yes, it did. It happened on a 1290 day. Okay, and we saw the destruction or desolation that the Saudi deal brought, because that is really what prompted Israel's enemies to attack on October 7th. But now we have Trump, and so in 2 Thessalonians 2:4 it says, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Okay, is that not Trump acting like he's king of the world or God of the world? Okay, and I didn't circle this, but I really should circle this. 2 Thessalonians 2:4. So look at that number 2:4. That connects to February 4th. And remember that February 4th was the day that Trump made his announcement about Gaza. Like Netanyahu was at the White House. And, that's where Trump, it was kind of like he stole Gaza. And said, okay, we're just going to ship out the Palestinians and we'll rebuild in Gaza. And, the way he talks about it, he's really wanting to, okay, so on the 10th of February, he called Gaza a real estate development for the future. Okay, so he's looking at Gaza with eyes of a real estate developer. Okay, so interesting that connects the 2 Thessalonians 2:4. And so then, verse 18, like I said before, pray that it may not happen in the winter, because then after that it says those days will be a time of tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the creation which God created until now and never will. And so after this announcement that Trump made, and then just the fact that Trump's returned, is we're seeing this time of tribulation that hasn't occurred before. We haven't seen a president, try to systematically destroy the U.S. government from within, as far as I know, but we're really seeing that in the days of Trump. Okay. And so I really highlighted winter because I think Trump brought a spiritual winter when he returned. Because it's really, first we had his inauguration had to be moved indoors. And then it's just been nonstop freezing, winter storms after, winter storm after winter storm after winter storm since he's been president. And so I really think we're in a season of winter. Like I think we're in the prophetical winter of the last days, if that makes sense. And then with Matthew 24, verse 22, I highlighted that because 22 connects to the number 8, okay? With the Jewish holidays, the 22nd on the calendar is always the 8th day of the holiday. And so it says, unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days would be cut short. Okay, so I didn't see a shortening of Biden's days, okay? And so I'm really hoping that, that we're going to see a shortening of Trump's, because I don't think we will survive if God doesn't cut these days short. I mean, especially because we have Trump like firing the nuclear safety people in America. We have Trump firing the like CDC people, like, yes, I believe there's probably fat in the American government, but there's also some very important things that the American government does that you don't want to get rid of it. And Trump is acting like a bull in a china shop. Okay, so now a bull in a china shop, once in a blue moon, he'll leave behind something intact. Okay, but in general, there's a general sense of destruction. So yes, occasionally Trump does, I mean, which could be debatable, occasionally does something that sounds good, but in general, he's just being basically destructive. Okay. And then, so with Matthew, I think I talked about everything I wanted to say on these verses. Yeah. So then Matthew 24 goes on to say, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders, so as if to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Okay. So I wrote, okay, so that's Matthew 24:24, and I talked about this in my last video. 2024 was the year of the false resurrection sign of Trump. But even now, this year, um, well, it really doesn't matter what Trump does. His followers are able to kind of bend and shape what he does and try to turn it into looking like something good. Okay. They're able to justify his actions. Okay. So there is a bunch of people that are being misled by Trump's words and actions. Okay. And his quote unquote signs and wonders. Okay. I mean, really, when Trump does stuff, we should wonder like, why is he doing this and is this really helpful? We should really think about it, is what I'm saying. And so Jesus warned his followers in advance, like at the beginning of this whole section in Matthew 24, verses 4 and 5, he said, the very first thing he said about the last days was there's going to be false Christs and false prophets. Okay, so then in verse 27 it says, for just as lightning comes from the east, so when you see east, think of the right, and then flashes even to the west. So when you see west, think of the left. Okay, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. So we've had this lightning type figure come from the right, flashing over to the west. Okay. So, because it says wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. So we definitely are seeing people gather around Trump. And so, like I said, in Mark 2, it says the same thing. Unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. Okay. So since we're in a time of judgment and a time of vengeance, we really want the days shortened. Okay. Otherwise Jesus's followers, won't survive. And especially because we're getting judgment for these bad ceasefires in Israel, and for Trump's statement about Gaza too. And we're seeing, the bad weather patterns, the airplane crashes, the avalanches, and the bad diseases going around, measles, COVID still going around, the flu, RSV. I think I'm forgetting one of them. And anyways, so if God didn't shorten those days, no life would have been saved. So, and then we also looked at the verses in Luke, and then in Luke it says, okay, well, first it says, verse 19 says, by your endurance you will gain your lives. Okay, so I didn't know if that 19 number connected to January 19th, which is the third Christmas on the calendar. It's the Armenian Christmas. Like the Armenians in Jerusalem celebrate their Christmas on January 19th. Okay. And so I'm wondering if there's a connection to the 40 days after this Armenian Christmas, as like maybe the final 40-day time frame. So that's why I thought that number 19 was interesting. And then it says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. So I wrote, because these are days, I highlighted because these are days of vengeance. And then it says, okay, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all the nations. And so these would be the people that don't follow Jesus. At some point, God's going to allow a civil war to rise up, and then the people that don't follow him are going to be led captive into all the nations. Okay, and then it says, Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So it's interesting that that's verse is also number 24, because I see 24 connected to Trump. So, because remember, 24 is like either 12 plus 12 or 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6, 4 sixes. Okay. Um, um, and Trump was voted in 2024. And so when we see Jerusalem, when it says Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, so remember in prophecy that sometimes entities can stand for several things. So Jerusalem could mean the city in Israel, or it could stand for America. It could be a prophetical shadow of America. Okay. And I actually think a lot of times when we see Jerusalem in prophecy, it is talking about America. Okay. And so when it says Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled, replace Jerusalem with America. And it says America will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, by Trump's followers, until the time of Trump's followers are fulfilled. So remember that God always allows his enemies to live out the fullness of their sins. Okay. And so that would be the fulfillment of the time of the Gentiles. Okay. And so God has allowed Trump and his followers to return to this day and age so they could live out the fullness of their sins. Okay. And we saw that with, with Biden, so Obama had 8 years, but then we had Biden came and they really, finished a lot of what Obama had started. Okay. So we definitely saw the fullness of the sins of the left. Okay. And so one of the things that's happening right now is God is using the stuff that Trump is doing to expose the wickedness of the left. Okay. I mean, but the right's also being exposed at the same time as we see Trump really acting crazy. So the sins are being exposed. And like another example is we're seeing like the sins of Hamas are being exposed, because especially they had a couple weeks ago, they had those men that were released from captivity, and just how they look like Holocaust survivors that they were not taken care of. And then just this past week, we saw Hamas released the dead bodies of that family. And so we saw how Hamas are murderers and terrorists, and just how they killed that poor sweet little family, and which was just such a tragedy. And so hopefully, so these are the last days. And so hopefully in these last days, you're paying attention to what's happening and willing to let go of any idols on the left you may be holding, any idols on the right, and especially any idols that you may be holding toward the Palestinians and Hamas. Okay. God's given you one last chance to repent of your false beliefs. Okay. So anyways, and so also what's interesting about Luke 21:24 is you got that 21 number, which connects to 777, and then, which would be like a picture of the fullness of Biden's sins. And then you have 24, which 24 also connects to 888. Okay. And so I think, Luke 21:24 could be another shadow of the Civil War. Okay. But I also think Jerusalem surrounded by armies, besides the Civil War that's coming to America, also could connect to the Syrian rebels. So I mentioned this in my last video. John Haller does a good job of talking about the Syrian rebels. If you want to look at that video, it's called "Strap In for 2025: A Year That Will Shake Things Up" with Pastor Tom Hughes and John Haller. So we could, we see possible multiple fulfillments of various verses. Okay. And then what I really think is that Trump is the thief of the night. Okay, for you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief, for you are all sons of light and sons of day. So then let us not sleep it as others do, but let us be alert and sober. So I, really think that Trump followers are sleeping. Okay. And see, what's interesting is that, so I already talked about Trump being a thief in the night in terms of like stealing Gaza, like just taking it over. Like, like he's king of the world, like he's God. And, so he has this whole like peace plan connected to Gaza, shipping out the Palestinians, rebuilding Gaza into, what did he call it? The Riviera of the Middle East. So the other thing too, in terms of Trump being the thief in the night, is that he's also like trying to steal the Prince of Peace name from Jesus. Okay, so that's another thing he's trying to steal. But also, like, he talked about the Panama Canal and Greenland and Canada, and then with his latest stuff with Ukraine too, it's like he's trying to steal, like their mineral rights or something connected to the mineral stuff that they do in Ukraine. He's wanting to get that back because America gave Ukraine money. The thing you got to understand is that Biden, I really believe Biden used Ukraine as his military force to deal with Russia. And then now we have crazy Trump coming in for some reason, who's a Putin fan. And and so then he's wanting payback from Ukraine. So he has it in for Ukraine. And I actually think some of that anti-Ukraine like stuff that we see on the far right is also a type of anti-Semitism, because the Jewish people do have a lot of history in the Ukraine area. So that's my take on that stuff. And Trump's just a nutcase for thinking that Putin's a good guy. Remember he thought the North Korean guy was a good guy. Trump doesn't exactly have a good knowledge of true evil and true goodness. Okay. So anyways, and so what's interesting is that I think we're in a day and age where everyone's saying peace and safety with Trump and with Trump's ideas for Gaza, but just in a general sense of what Trump's doing in America, it's just a whole generic, MAGA is this whole peace and safety, kind of message for America. And so God says destruction is going to come upon them suddenly. And so that's why we want to be sober, okay? Those people that think that Trump can bring peace and safety into America and bring peace and safety into the Middle East are in darkness, okay? They don't understand the truth. So we need to be alert, and we need to not sleep as they are doing, and be alert and sober. So the AOD setup. So 1290 days after July 26, 2021 was when Biden announced the end of the combat mission in Iraq. And that day ended up, so 1290 days was 2/4/2025. Okay, so another 1290 days. Because I already said the Saudi deal ended up being a 1290 day. Okay. And so what's interesting that Biden wanted to get rid of the combat mission in Iraq is they were actually going after ISIS in Iraq. So that was just another dumb decision that recent presidents have made, in America. I mean, he also pulled troops out of Afghanistan. Um, and so the regular sacrifice of the military people in Iraq was abolished by Biden. Okay. And then 1290 days later, the abomination that causes desolation was set up. And that's Biden. I mean, that's Trump making his announcement, Gaza announcement on February 4th. Okay. What's interesting about February 4th is also Shabbat. Okay, well, 2 plus 4 add up to 6. Okay, but it's also Shabbat 6 on the um Jewish calendar, which is the 11th month and the 6th day. So then I was looking at the verses of 11 and 6. So Genesis 11:6 connects to the Tower of Babel, and it says, "The Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language, and this is what they've begun to do, and now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them." So even though people like to think the left and the right are different, fundamentally, I mean, now that Trump was brought in and has kind of basically changed the Republican Party, the left and the right are really similar. Okay. And especially in terms of, so when Trump was making his Gaza announcement, he was talking about the Palestinians like they were good people and they deserve a good place to live. And, so there we're missing that concept of good and evil. Okay. So God talks about there's good people and there's evil people. Okay. And Israel was supposed to deal with the evil people. They weren't allowed to let them remain because otherwise they'd end up, being thorns in their side. And so we've lost that concept of good and evil that's really talked about in the Bible. God says there is no one good, not one. Everyone goes his own way. Um, um, we lost that concept of good and evil. I mean, it used to be so much stronger because we used to like have cowboys and Indians, in America. But another good example was J.D. Vance, like the vice president went to Europe and he was talking to the European leaders and he said, "You guys are your own worst enemy, even more so than China and Russia." And I don't remember who we all listed in that list. But it was a stupid thing that he said because obviously there are true enemies out there that are dangerous. And so China, is dangerous. North Korea is dangerous. Russia is dangerous. So we've just lost that concept of good and evil. Okay. And that, and especially see it all the time with Hamas. No one's willing to say Hamas is evil. Okay. That's why God has to expose their evilness. So, and so that's why God's saying they're all one language and they all have the same language. Okay. When you start talking about the Middle East, like everybody's basically good in the Middle East and they've just had a poor childhood or they just haven't had the opportunities, blah, 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 your policies are going to reflect this dumb belief system. Because, a leopard doesn't change his spots. A terrorist does not stop being a terrorist. I mean, unless the rare chance that they have a messianic encounter and repent and turn to Jesus. But most of the time when you see a terrorist, they're going to stay a terrorist. Okay. So that's the deal. So kind of a dangerous time in the world when you don't recognize true enemies. Okay. And so then, Trump's out there gallivanting with Putin, not recognizing that he's actually a dangerous person. And just the whole thing too with Trump and Ukraine. Like it's sad because, Ukraine, their true enemy is Russia. They keep bombing them and causing great devastation and destruction. And, Trump's blaming it all on Ukraine. So just a weird time in the world. So the Tower of Babel, so it says now the whole earth used the same language and the same words, and it came about as they journeyed east. So remember I said whenever you see that word east, think of the right, okay? So they're journeying toward Trump, okay? Or to the, right side, you know. So they settled in the land of Shinar. And so it's interesting, it says they said to one another, come, let us make bricks. And okay, so NASB wants to add this word them, burn them thoroughly. But I actually think it makes more sense when you say, come, let us make bricks and burn thoroughly. And so really that's what they're doing in America, is trying to burn down America, the government, okay? And then when it says they use brick for stone, so the brick would be like Trump instead of the living stone of Jesus, the Messiah, the cornerstone that they rejected, okay? And they use tar for mortar. So tar is probably more of a man-made thing, and mortar is probably more of a God, natural thing. Okay. And then they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city. Is that not what they're saying about Gaza? Let's build a city there. Let's build the Riviera of the Middle East. And a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name. Trump's trying to be the Prince of Peace. And so, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. The Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language, and this is what they begun to do, and now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. I mean, so, look at Trump. He has a lot of power, okay? He has a lot of power in America. He has a lot of followers. He has all the rich people on his side, Elon Musk and all the tech giants are with him, and then he's got Saudi Arabia, and he's got UAE, all the people that he made peace, quote unquote, peace deals with in his first term. So he has a lot of power, and so God, is going to, have to put a stop to that. So then, God says, come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. And so the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. So we're going to see some kind of confusion. I mean, the confusion could be during the Civil War, okay? And then, then they'll have to stop building the city. Okay, and the city ends up being called Babel because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. Okay, so I think we're about to see the rest of the fulfillment of that. And then Babylon, okay, so this is just nuts to me how I listen to Christian people on the right and just how they are missing that Trump is building this Babylon kingdom, okay? Because, okay, so when you read about Babylon, so first of all, we read about Babylon in Revelation 17 and Revelation 18. And so I think Revelation 17 connects to Biden, and then Revelation 18 connects to Trump. 18's the 666 number, okay? And then, we have an angel that comes and says, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird, okay? So, Trump and his followers have their own type of demons, okay? And it's interesting that it talks about them being unclean and hateful birds, okay? Because we see in the story of the cupbearer and the baker that in the third basket of the baker, the birds come and eat the bread, okay? And the bread was all types of baked good for Pharaoh. And so we saw with Biden that he baked a bunch of stuff for, his global agenda. And now we have Trump's followers being the birds that are coming and eating those all up and destroying them. Okay. And then it says, okay, that's the bird imagery, I think, that's happening. And then it says, for all the nations have drunk the wine of the passions of her immorality. All the nations, remember Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. So I highlighted merchants of the earth because we're definitely seeing, like those tech giants, following Trump. And then it says, to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning, for she says in her heart, I sit as a queen and I am not a widow and will never see mourning. Okay, so remember, women in the Bible are connected to the Christians or the Americans. Okay, so Trump as president could be a type of queen, and he's saying I am not a widow. Like, he's not the his her true husband hasn't died, because okay, so like Jesus, the fact that this queen doesn't recognize that she's a widow doesn't recognize that it's like her relationship with Jesus has died. Okay, and then because what they're saying is they have their messianic figure. They're following Trump. Okay, so they're not a widow. They have their husband. It's Trump, and they will never see mourning. And so they don't, they think only good's going to come out of Trump. Okay. But then God says, for this reason, in one day, okay, see that's verse 8 for the eighth king. For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence, mourning, famine, and she will be burnt up with fire, for the Lord God who judges her is strong. And the kings of the earth who committed immorality and lived sensuously with her will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning. And the merchants of the earth, okay, highlighted that, weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Okay. So Babylon is really connected to the buyers and the sellers, and the king of the earth is, connected to the buying and the selling. Okay. The beast of the earth, sorry, is connected to buying and selling. Okay. So the money changers. Okay. So remember, Jesus had to drive out all those who were buying and selling in the temple. Okay. And so I think we're going to see Jesus return to do that again. Okay. Because I see America and Israel as a type of temple, where God was worshipped. Okay. And so then what we have is Trump coming in being a merchant and buying and selling. And especially with Gaza, his plan for Gaza is not about establishing a house of prayer in Gaza, in the land of Israel. It's about, just making more money. Okay. So Jesus drove out those who were buying and selling, overturned the table of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. So selling doves would be those people selling peace deals to make money. Okay. Definitely a picture of Trump. Okay. And then Jesus said to him, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den. Okay. So, Trump's doing that to both America and Israel. Okay. And then says kind of the same thing in Mark 11. I'm reading it to see if there's anything. Oh, and he would not permit anyone to carry merchandise through the temple. Okay. And then in John, it says, and to those who were selling the doves, he said, take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business. So Trump wants to make America and Israel a place of business, a place of his business. He wants to take the land of Gaza and make it a place of business for him. Okay. And so then, so like I said, the the beast from the earth is connected to the buying and selling. Okay, so the beast from the earth in Revelation 13, it says, and he causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the freemen and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand. So see that right hand, right, and on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. So what are we seeing with Trump? He is only appointing the people to his cabinet and to jobs in America, to those who have basically his name on their forehead or on their right hand. So the people that are connected to him, the ones that will like kiss his feet. Okay. And so then it says, here's wisdom, let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. So like I said, Trump does a lot of things on, he's had those 6 peace deals, 12-6, which is 666 is when he announced about moving the embassy to Jerusalem. February 4th adds up to 6, or it's Shabbat 6. So that those are calculations that we do, to see how Trump and the stuff that he does and the buying and the selling that he does are connected to the 666. Okay. And so, I mean, it's kind of interesting because it's kind of like he causes all the people to be given a mark. And so all the people right now in America are like under judgment because of what Trump did with the Hamas ceasefire and then his Gaza announcement. And so that's why God has to shorten the day and Jesus has to come and save us from that judgment that we're under. I mean, there's still the judgment from the deal of the century, with the coronavirus and all that stuff. So if you're living in a day and age of multiple judgments, it's kind of a scary time, and you need a Messiah to save you from that. Okay. And so one of the things I want you to think about, so Trump is fulfilling so many prophecies in the Bible. And so I believe Trump's words are the manna in the wilderness. Okay, because, one of the things they did with the manna is they would eat, when they would gather it and they would grind it between 2 millstones, or they would beat it in the mortar, or they would boil it in the pot, and they would make cakes with it. Okay. And the taste of the cakes were like cakes baked with oil. Okay. And so what I believe is that Trump's words, okay, so whenever Trump says something, I don't know if you've listened to conservatives and Trump followers and how they'll take the words that Trump says, which a lot of times are really nutty words, and they try to justify what he's saying, or they're trying to make it into some kind of great plan that Trump has. Like the Gaza words that Trump said. They're like, oh no, Trump doesn't really want to take Gaza or own Gaza. He's just trying to pressure people with his words. And so they're all trying to ascribe to him good motives. And so they're taking his words and they manipulate them and grind them and beat them and boil them to try to make them, nice messianic sounding words. Okay, little cakes baked with oil. Okay. So that's what's happening with Trump's words. Okay. And so remember in the wilderness, God, the manna fell with the dew. Okay. When the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna would fall with it. But then when they got into the promised land in the book of Joshua, on the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. The manna ceased on the day after they had eaten some of the produce of the land. So the sons of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate some of the yield of the land of Canaan during that year. So once we get into the promised land, we're no longer going to be eating the manna. We're no longer going to be eating Trump's words. Okay, we're going to have Okay, so the next, okay, uh, there's a slide coming up that talks about it. And then, so, because what does God say about the manna? He says, "You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He humbled you and let you be hungry and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. Thus you are to know in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you, just as a man disciplines his son. In the wilderness, he fed you manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and he might test you, to do good for you in the end. Otherwise, you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who has given you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. Um, so, um, I mean, so Trump's words, so Trump is really a test. Are you going to follow Trump, or are you going to hang on to the words of God? Okay. Um, are you going to imagine that Trump is saying something good, or are you just going to wait and attain for the Messiah to come? Okay. Um, and because it's a test. Okay. How are you going to respond to Trump? Okay. Um, and his words. Okay. Because I remember that God says, or I think Jesus says this, I won't return until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. I think we're suffering all this stuff under the left and under the right, because at some point we are like, I've already been there a long time, but hopefully you're at the point where you are going to say to Jesus, blessed are you who comes in the name of the Lord, because I'm so tired of hearing the lies on the left and the lies on the right. You are going to be so happy when Jesus shows up with the truth. Okay. And so what do we read in John? Jesus is the true bread from heaven. Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. Jesus then said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread out of heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread out of heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes out of heaven and gives life to the world. So Jesus's words are going to bring life, whereas Trump's words bring death. Okay. Then they said to him, Lord, always give us this bread. Jesus said to him, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. I am the bread and light of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. That would be the Trump followers, and they died. Okay. This is the bread which comes down out of heaven, so that no one may eat of it and not die. Oh, wait, I think I said that wrong. This is the bread which comes down out of heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down out of heaven. If anyone eats this bread, he will live forever. And the bread also which I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. This is the bread which came down out of heaven, not as the fathers ate and died. He who eats this bread will live forever. Okay, so we want Jesus, the true bread from heaven. Okay, and then Trump's also fulfilling some of the prophecies as Moses. Okay, so we saw Trump doing some of the let my people go type messages. To Hamas. But we also saw him saying that because he got a prisoner out of Russia, and there was another country too. I think he was trying to get some American prisoners out. And then what was really interesting was when Elon Musk showed up at the White House. That was the week we were reading about Jethro, Moses's father-in-law. And so Moses's father-in-law comes to Moses to give him advice. Okay, well, what was interesting about Moses at that time, his father-in-law Jethro pointed out that Moses was like trying to run everything, okay, that everyone was coming to Moses to make judgments. And so Jethro actually told Moses, like, you need to appoint like 1,000 people, and 50, people in charge of 1,000 and people in charge of 50. Like, you need people underneath you. And so I think that whole story is a picture of how we have Trump, who's like trying to run everything instead of using Congress and the courts and governors and uh, um, oh, I can't think of it now, the people in charge of cities. Trump's just trying to run everything. So we see that in the scripture. And don't forget, we're in the second greater Exodus. And so that's why we're seeing tons of plagues, and then including Trump's layoffs. Okay. God talks about in the last days, he's going to do a shaking, shaking of Israel and shaking of America in the last days, shaking of his people. And so God's using Trump to bring a shaking to America. The war in Israel obviously had been bringing a shaking to Israel. So we're in the season of the shakings too. Okay. And then what's interesting too, so sometimes other people fulfill the prophecies. So Netanyahu is fulfilling the prophecy of Moses being one who can't speak. So Aaron steps in to speak for Moses. Okay. So with Netanyahu, first he had Biden stepping in to speak for Israel at the ceasefire negotiations, and now he's got Trump stepping in to speak up for it. Like, seriously, Netanyahu is really like stepping back and letting Trump make decisions for Israel. I mean, he did the same thing with Biden, but it's just so nutty. Um, um, and then, okay, and one point, and the other point I wanted to make too, the fact that we're in the second greater Exodus and we see all these plagues. Okay, so remember in the original 10 plagues in Egypt, the locust came and killed what the hail had left behind. So we saw that being fulfilled in California, where the mudslides hit what survived the fires. Okay, so we're seeing a repeat of some of the things that happened with the plagues in Egypt. Okay, I mean, now we're seeing plagues around the world. Okay, I mean, what the first Exodus happened in the nation of Egypt, but now it's happening in, just involving the whole world. Okay, plagues everywhere, but mostly focused on Israel and America. Okay, so I'm hoping and wondering if Trump is he's the guy who gets the times, and half the time, which I'm hoping is 3.5 weeks and not 3.5 months. So only time would tell. So the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle to fly into the wilderness, where she was nourished for times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So we need God nourishing us in the wilderness, because we can't really pay attention to Biden and we can't really pay attention to Trump. We need to rely on God. Okay. And then in Daniel 12, he talks about, he sees, two people, one on one side of the river and one on the other side of the river. That would be someone on the right, someone on the left. And then someone asked the man dressed in linen who's above the waters of the river, how long will it be until the end of these wonders? Okay. And the man dressed in linen above the waters, which is probably a messianic figure, a picture of Jesus, he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a times, and half a time. And as soon as they finished shattering the power of the holy people, all these events would be completed. So I think shattering the power of the holy people, we're going to see power shattered in America, power shattered in Israel too, I think. And then the events will be completed. But in Daniel 7, we saw a fourth beast, which is a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 horns will arise, and another will arise after him. So I'm wondering if the fourth beast connects to Trump's first time as president, but also his second time. And then, like I said, the 10 kings connect to the militant followers of Trump. It actually connects to the 10. Okay, so remember in the wilderness, they sent out 12 spies to spy out the land. 2 of them came back and had faith, and 10 of them came back and didn't have faith. Okay, and so I think the 10 kings connect to the 10 in the wilderness that didn't have faith. Okay, so what's interesting here is it says, and it's verse 24 again, note 24, it says, out of this kingdom 10 kings will rise. So we saw the Trump followers rise up in 2024 to vote Trump back in. And then it says another will arise after them. That would be Trump. That would make him like the 11th king or the 11th horn. Okay, which I think is interesting because that connects to the number 47, Trump being the 47th president. And then it says he will be different from the previous ones. So Trump's on the right, not on the left, and he will subdue 3 kings. Okay, so he subdued Biden, Harris, and Obama. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the highest one. He's definitely wearing us down. And he will intend, okay, this is definitely Trump. He will intend to make alterations in times and his law. And in law, is he not trying to fundamentally change America? And they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half the time. So I think Trump is really the fulfillment of these verses. So we also, I think these verses are really key. So remember Pharaoh had a dream, and he dreamed about 7 cows sleek and fat, and then he dreamed about 7 ugly cows, and then he had a second dream where he dreamed about plump and good ears of corn, and then and then there was 7 thin and scorched ears. Okay, so first of all, one of the things I wanted to point out is, so we got cows and we got corn. It's either corn or it's either grain, either way. But see how that connects to America, because we're definitely a country of cows and grain, or cows and corn, the agricultural and the cows would have like ranches in the West. So there's a connection, there's a shadow to America. Okay. And then look at the 7 thin ears are scorched by the east wind. Okay, remember east connects to the right. Okay, so I think those are the Trump followers. So I think the fat and sleek cows connected to Obama in his term, his 8 years as president. And then we had Trump came, and his cows were ugly and gaunt, and they turned around and they ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. So the first time that Trump was president, they, wiped out a lot of what Obama did as president. Then we had Biden came, and because it actually says, then Pharaoh awoke, and so I wrote Biden's head wound is healed, so Biden returns. Okay, and so then there was this second dream, so a second set of left and right. Okay, and so Biden returns, and then he builds up his world government. They're plump and good, and then Trump's followers come and eat up the fat corn. Okay, so then it says, it finishes it all by saying, then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And so after these 2 dreams, it's like you're moving into the Messianic era. So that's why I really think we're at the end of days. Okay, because we've seen the left, then the right chew them up, then the left corn chewed up by the right corn, and and um, then you're going to move into the Messianic era. Okay, so good news. I think we're near the end. Um, I talked about this in my last video too, about how Jacob was going from one side of the bank to the other side of the bank. And so we've been in this pattern in America going from left to right to left to right. Okay. And then it says in verse 24, Jacob was left alone and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And so that could be Trump wrestling with America until daybreak. Okay. And then because in Daniel it says many will go back and forth. Okay. So we definitely, have been in that cycle in America. So, and it's been happening in Israel too. So going back and forth between left and right. Anyways, okay, so I wanted to make a comment about all the airplane issues we've been seeing, and then avalanches. And I keep thinking of that song, What Goes Up Must Come Down. So in Isaiah 40, we read, Let every valley be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low, and let the rough ground become a plain, and the rugged terrain a broad valley. And in Zechariah, it says, What are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel, you will become a plain, and he will bring forth the top stone with shouts of grace to it. So we read in the scriptures and the prophets, these prophecies about the mountains and hills are going to be made low. Okay, so I think these airplanes kind of crashing and stuff are like warnings from God that the mountains and the hills are going to be, brought down. And so what was really interesting too was that one airplane that, okay, the right wing fell off and then it rolled over, okay, upside down. And so I really think that's a picture of this is what's happening in America. God's trying to turn America upside down, okay. And in a lot of the like in the book of Esther, we see a reversal of fortunes. And so that we're waiting for the day and age for God to step up and do a reversal of fortunes for his people. Okay. And then, so one of the dates I'm looking at is February 27th, because in Genesis 8:14 it says, In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Okay, I won't spend a lot of time because I'm really bad with dates. Okay, but one of the things about February 27th is that it's the 24th day after February 4th when Trump made his Gaza announcement. It's the 40th day after January 19th, where I told you that was the third Christmas. So then this February 27th would be the third candle mass. And there kind of seems to be hidden in the scriptures, like hidden candle masses. Okay, we see a lot with the 40 days. Okay, it would be the 15th day of the new year for trees, which that would make February 26th the 14th day of the new year. And we saw that the judgment of the firstborn was the 14th day of the first month. Okay, February 26th is also 4 years, 11 months, and 9 days after 3/18 in 2020. That was the start of the shutdown. Okay. So we see that 9/11 number in there. Okay. So I don't know if that means anything. We just got to wait and see what happens. The next dates that I would be looking at is, well, we got Purim coming up in March. And so if something doesn't happen before that, I think that would be high watch dates. Maybe Mardi Gras and Ash Wednesday, the first week of March. I mean, that's next week. So we'll just see what happens. I really hope we don't have to wait 3.5 months of Trump. And hopefully, if we do, it's 3.5 months from his inauguration. I've been doing counting since February 4th. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens. And the airplane crashes too connect to, so we read about the fiery hail in Exodus. And so we definitely see those with the airplane crashes, where kind of this mixture of fire and ice. So, like the first airplane crash on January 29th, big ball of fire, and then they crash into the icy Potomac, I think is what happened. And then on February 17th, yeah, so that was the plane that flipped over. And it was a snowy, icy day, but there was also a big fireball with that one. And so, and I think some of the numbers too of those airplane crashes mean stuff too. Um, um, so, and then we also saw that, um, let's see, so I can't remember, somehow I connected these verses in with the fiery hail. Oh, I know why. Because we had fires in California and then we had winter storms everywhere else. And so we were seeing fire and hail at the same time in January. And so then um, God was saying with these plagues, I will send a very heavy hail such as not been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. So we're seeing with these winter storms, we're seeing destruction that we've never seen before with the like the flooding in Kentucky. um the Kentucky flooding. And then in Daniel it says, thus he has confirmed his words which he has spoken against us and against our rulers who ruled us, to bring on us great calamity. For under the whole heaven there has not been done anything like what was done to Jerusalem. So remember I said sometimes Jerusalem can be America. And so we saw in California, with those fires, great calamity. The flooding's been bad too. And then, and especially with California, we've had the fires and then the mudslides, so it's like, okay, like there wasn't enough devastation and then the mudslides brought more devastation. Okay. But definitely we're going to see even more with the Civil War. So, but we're breaking records with the winter storms and stuff like that. And then in Daniel 12, so Daniel 12:1, the numbers connect to when Netanyahu returned to power. So it said, at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands over the sons of your people, will arise. So that connects to first Netanyahu returning on 12/1/2022, and he's been in power since then. And then, but I think it also could connect to Trump on 1/20/2025, because then it goes on to say, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. Okay, so ever since Netanyahu returned to power, there's been distress in Israel. But we're seeing the same thing with Trump in America. Ever since he's returned to power, there's been distress in America. Okay, so I think they're both fulfilling the Michael prophecy, okay, and distress prophecy. Because a lot of times things that happen in Israel get repeated in America, and things that happen in America get repeated in Israel. Because why? Because we're connected, And then in Exodus, it says, all the persons who came from the loins of Jacob are 70 in number, but Joseph was already in Egypt. And then verse 6 says, Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation. So I highlighted that Exodus 1:6. I think this actually connects to January 6th, although there could be another fulfillment now with Trump that, when it says Joseph died, it actually means that like Biden died and all his brothers and all that generation. So anyways, but I just wanted to point out, because I really like it when the numbers match the date of the event. So January 6th, 2021. So Just I don't know how much I'll say about this because I don't really have anything new to say, but just with the Twin Pines Mall. So we see hidden numbers like 11-5 was when Marty ran over one of the pines. That was the election when Trump won. But we also see 11-6. That was when kind of the hidden 11-6 and the 116. That was when they announced Trump as the winner. And so when you flip 11-6, it looks like 9/11. That's in this slide. Um, Um, and then we also see a hidden 1-3-3-5. And I haven't figured out a 1-3-3-5. One thing I thought of is like maybe one connects to maybe it's symbolic, and so one maybe connects to Obama, and then 3 connects to 3 things that Trump did, and then the second 3 connects to 3 things that Biden did against Israel, and then the 5 connects to um, the dividing of time, the Civil War. But also, I just remembered too, the 1 could connect to the 30 days in Esther, and then 3 connects to the 3 days of um, the Jewish people fasting and praying, and then 3 days of Esther and her maidens fasting and praying. So actually, if you think about that, so that kind of connects to what I just said about, so first we had Israel, going through distress with Netanyahu returning to power, and then now we got Trump causing America to go through distress. So 3 days of the Jewish people fasting and praying, and then 3 days of the Christians in America fasting and praying. And does the 3 connect to how many days have we been in war? Because I'm trying to think, are we at the, oh no, we're at 490 days of war. I guess that doesn't connect to that. Because we're at, on February 7th, it was 490 days of war. I was thinking maybe we were at 300 days of war in Israel, which would connect to one of the 3s, but we're not. Although we're kind of in the 3rd year of the war. And then we're definitely in the 3rd year. Like yesterday was the 3rd year of the Ukraine war. So anyways, so so moving on, because I didn't really have any great inspiration about the 1-3-3-5, but don't go either left or right. Okay. You should observe to do just as the Lord your God commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right or left. And hopefully you're seeing how they're nuts. Okay. Hopefully they're being exposed for what they really are. Okay. And then the dispute among the disciples is a picture of the left versus right, how they keep, trying to claim that they're the greatest. Okay. The left tries to claim that they're great, and the right tries to claim that they're great. And so Trump does not remember Joseph. So remember, the chief cupbearer does not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Okay, Trump and his followers work on wiping out Joseph Biden's, it's funny that his name is Joseph, work on wiping out Joseph Biden's policies. And it's interesting because it's quickly like Judas. So remember, Jesus told Judas to act quickly. And so I think that's why we're seeing Trump moving at this breakneck pace. Okay. But then we also see with Trump and his followers forgetting Jesus the Messiah and trying to establish their own messianic kingdom. And really, I think the Bible prophesies that they're going to go to war against Jesus and his followers after the Civil War. So Trump is like Saul, who didn't wait for Samuel. Okay. And so that would be like not waiting for Jesus. Okay. And the Israelites in the wilderness didn't wait for Moses, but built a golden calf. Okay. So remember, Trump called his second presidency our golden age. So the Israelites didn't wait for Moses. They built a golden calf, and then the next day Moses came down from the mountain. And so I think what we're going to see is we got Trump, you know, in the establishing the golden age, quote unquote, and that so then now we can expect the soon return of Jesus. We can expect Jesus coming down from the mountain to see this stupid golden calf that they built. Okay. Um, and the Jewish people say those who mourn the destruction of Jerusalem will merit seeing it rebuilt with the coming of Moshiach. So it's interesting, when you connect Jerusalem to America, it's like those right now that are mourning the destruction of America, we will merit seeing it rebuilt when Jesus comes back. Okay, so that's a good promise if, in this day and age, if you're being sad about what's happening in America. And I really think we're out of time. Um, so we're in the last days. I think Jesus is at the door. So hang in there. So we got to wait and attain. We need to wait and attain for the 1335 day. I pray that God gives you the grace to wait and attain and wait for Jesus. Okay, don't go right or left, but wait for Jesus. Okay. Don't join the sea of Obama, Biden, Harris. Don't join the sea of Trump. Stay on the dry land with Messiah, where we will stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. I mean, there it says the great city is split into 3 parts. Okay. Okay. So he goes to destruction. So hopefully this is giving you an idea of what the age that we're in right now, what's happening in our world right now and why. Okay. So so look to the mountains where your help comes from. Okay. um is really what God's calling us for. Wait for the coming of Messiah. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate. So God bless. Hang in there. I know it's difficult, especially if you work for the federal government. um so but hang in there. God's got your back. If you're one of his followers and believers. So just hang in there and trust that God has a plan for you. So um be blessed.